The porch creaked when he stepped outside every morning, coffee mug in hand to watch the sun climb over the fields. At 72, his body moved slower than it once had, but his routine never changed. Routine was something the war had taught him to value. That morning felt no different from any other. The wind was cool. The sky was pale blue. Birds called from the trees. Thomas took a slow sip of coffee and stared at the dirt road that led to his home. Very few people came down that road anymore. The nearest town was small, and most folks there barely knew his name. Then he heard it. A car. The sound was distant at first, barely more than a hum, but it grew louder as the vehicle approached. Thomas frowned slightly. Deliveries were rare. Visitors were rarer still. The car slowed. Gravel crunched. The engine stopped. Thomas stood still, his hand tightening around the mug. For reasons he couldn't explain, a strange feeling settled in his chest. Not fear, not exactly. Something heavier. Something familiar. A memory stirred, one he had kept buried for 40 years. He set the mug down on the porch railing and walked toward the door just as a soft knock echoed through the quiet house. 3 knocks. Polite. Careful. Thomas paused with his hand on the handle. For a brief moment, he was no longer an old man in a quiet farmhouse. He was 26 again, standing in the ruins of a shattered village. Smoke in the air. Screams in the distance. A child crying somewhere nearby. He shook his head as if clearing dust from his mind and opened the door. A woman stood on the porch. She was in her early 40s, maybe mid-40s, with dark hair pulled back neatly and eyes that seemed far too serious for someone her age. She held her hands together, fingers trembling slightly. Behind her sat a modest rental car, its engine ticking softly as it cooled. They stared at each other in silence. Her eyes widened, her breath caught, and then she spoke. "You don't remember me," she said quietly. "But you saved my life." Thomas felt the ground beneath him shift. The air seemed to leave his lungs. His heart began to pound, slow and heavy, like a distant drum. 40 years vanished in an instant, and in their place came the face of a little girl, dirty, terrified, and alone, reaching out to him in the middle of a war that had taken everything from them both. This was a knock he had waited a lifetime for, and a story that was far from over. Thomas did not answer right away. The woman's words hung in the air between them, heavier than the silence that had come before. He studied her face carefully, searching for something, anything, that might unlock the memory already clawing its way up from the depths of his mind. Saved my life. He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," he said at last, his voice rough from age and disuse. "You've got the wrong man." The woman shook her head slowly. Her eyes glistened, but she did not cry. "Not yet." "No," she said. "I don't." Thomas stepped back without realizing it, the wooden floor creaking beneath his boots. The porch, the fields, the sky, all of it felt suddenly distant, like a painting he was looking at from far away. The woman took a careful step forward but stopped herself at the doorway, as if she didn't want to cross a line without permission. "My name is Anna," she said. "I was 7 years old when you found me." 7. The number hit him like a quiet blow to the chest. Thomas closed his eyes. The war had given him many memories. Too many. Most of them were things a man didn't want to remember. Faces blurred together over time. Sounds faded. Places lost their shape. But children were different. He opened his eyes again. "Come inside," he said quietly. They sat at the small wooden table in the kitchen. Sunlight streamed through the window, landing on the faded checkered tablecloth that Thomas had washed and reused for years. He poured her a glass of water, his hands shaking just enough that he noticed. Anna wrapped her fingers around the glass but didn't drink. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Thomas leaned back in his chair. "Tell me," he said. "Tell me what you remember." Anna took a deep breath. "I remember hiding," she began. "Under a staircase. The building was broken. The walls were cracked, and dust kept falling from the ceiling every time there was a loud noise. Thomas's jaw tightened. I remember my mother pushing me, Anna continued. She told me not to make a sound. She said she would come back. Her voice wavered, but she kept going. She never did. The kitchen seemed to shrink around them. Thomas stared at the table, his mind no longer in his farmhouse but thousands of miles away, decades in the past. I remember hearing boots, Anna said. Men shouting in a language I didn't understand. I was so scared I couldn't cry, I just held my breath. Thomas nodded slowly. Yes, he murmured. I remember that building. Anna looked up sharply. You do? He rubbed a hand over his face. It was near the edge of the village. The staircase was half gone. I almost missed you. Her hands began to tremble. You stopped, she said. Everyone else kept moving, but you stopped. Thomas's chest tightened. He could see it now. The village had been burning. Smoke filled the air so thick it burned his eyes. Orders had been shouted. Everything was noise and chaos. But then he had heard something else. A sound that didn't belong. A soft, broken sob. I told the others to keep going, Thomas said. I don't even remember what excuse I gave. Maybe I didn't give one at all. Anna nodded. I remember your face. You looked tired. So tired. But when you saw me, you changed. Thomas closed his eyes again. He had lifted broken wood away from the stairs. Slowly, carefully, afraid that one wrong move would bring the whole place down. And then he had seen her. A small girl, covered in dust, clutching a piece of cloth to her chest like it was the only thing holding her together. You didn't speak at first, Anna said. You just held out your hand. Thomas's throat tightened. I didn't know your language, he said, but I knew fear. Fear sounds the same everywhere. Anna gave a small, sad smile. You picked me up, she said. I remember your jacket. It smelled like smoke and dirt, but I felt safe, for the first time in days. Thomas exhaled slowly. He had carried her through the village while shells exploded in the distance. Every step had felt like a risk, every second like borrowed time. I left you with a woman, he said, near the trucks. Yes, Anna whispered. She was a nurse. She took me away. They sat in silence again. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. Life went on, unaware of the past unfolding inside that small kitchen. I thought about you, Thomas said finally. More times than I can count. I always wondered if you lived. Anna's eyes filled at last. A single tear slipped down her cheek. I did, she said, because of you. Thomas looked away, embarrassed by the emotion rising in his chest. I went to America later, Anna continued. I grew up. I went to school. I had a family. She hesitated. But I never forgot your face, or your voice, or the way you looked at me like I mattered. Thomas swallowed hard. That day, Anna said, you were the only good thing in a world that had fallen apart. The words landed softly, but they carried weight. I spent years trying to find you, she added. Records, names, old photographs. It took a long time. She looked around the modest kitchen, the worn cabinets, the simple life. When I finally found this address, she said, I didn't know what I would say. I just knew I had to knock. Thomas stared at her. 40 years ago, he had made a choice in the middle of chaos. A small choice, one that felt almost invisible at the time. Now, sitting across from the child he had saved, now a grown woman, he realized something he had never fully understood. Some moments never end, and some doors once opened change everything that comes after. Thomas rose from the table slowly and walked to the sink, more out of habit than need. He stared out the window at the fields beyond, letting the quiet steady his breathing. His hands rested on the edge of the counter, knuckles pale. I never told anyone about you, he said at last. Not really. Anna looked up. Not even your family? He shook his head. I never had one. Not the kind people expect, anyway. She waited. He could tell. Some people rushed silence. She didn't. When I came back from the war, Thomas said, everyone wanted stories, heroes, victories, big moments. He turned around slowly. But the truth was, I didn't feel like a hero. I felt tired, empty. Anna listened without interrupting. So I bought this land, he continued. Built this house, worked, slept, repeated. That was enough. Anna glanced around the kitchen again, seeing it differently now. Not as a modest home, but as a place built to keep the world at a safe distance. I thought about that village sometimes, Thomas said. About the people who didn't make it out. I told myself remembering wouldn't help anyone. He met her eyes. But you standing here proves I was wrong. Anna took a breath. I used to think about you too, especially when I was afraid. Thomas raised an eyebrow gently. Still afraid? She smiled faintly. Sometimes. I think everyone is. She looked down at her hands. When I was moved to the camp, the nights were the hardest. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know who I would see when I woke up. She paused. But I remembered you carrying me, and I told myself, if one man could stop in the middle of war and help a child, then the world couldn't be all bad. Thomas felt something tighten behind his eyes. I built my whole life on that idea, Anna continued. I became a teacher. I wanted children to feel safe, to be seen. He nodded slowly. You did more with that moment than I ever did. No, she said gently. You gave it to me. I just carried it forward. They sat quietly again. After a moment, Thomas stood and reached for an old wooden box on a shelf above the counter. He brought it to the table and opened it carefully. Inside were a few folded letters, a worn photograph, and a small metal tag. I kept this, he said, lifting the tag. It was yours. Anna leaned forward, her breath catching. I lost it that day, she whispered. I found it near the stairs, Thomas said. Didn't know why I kept it. Just felt wrong to leave it behind. He placed it in her hand. Her fingers closed around it, trembling. For a long moment she couldn't speak. Thank you, she said finally, her voice barely audible. They talked for hours after that. About the war, about the years that followed, about the small choices that had shaped their lives without them ever realizing it. The sun shifted across the sky, filling the kitchen with warm light. At some point, Thomas made soup. Anna insisted on helping, laughing softly as she chopped vegetables, the sound unfamiliar but welcome in the quiet house. As evening approached, Anna grew quiet again. There's something else, she said. Thomas looked up from the stove. What is it? She hesitated. I didn't just come to say thank you. His stomach tightened, not with fear, but with anticipation. I came because my son asked me to, she said. Your son? He's 14, Anna explained. Smart, curious, and lately, angry at the world. Thomas turned off the stove and sat down again. He asked me where I learned to believe people could be good, she said. So I told him about you. Thomas blinked. You told him about me? Yes, she said. And he said something I didn't expect. She swallowed. He said he wanted to meet the man who taught his mother how to hope. The room felt suddenly very still. I told him you might not want to be found, Anna continued. That 40 years is a long time. Thomas rubbed his hands together slowly. And what did he say? He said, Anna replied, then we'll just knock and see if he answers. Thomas let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Is he here? He asked. She nodded. In town. I didn't want to bring him until I knew. Thomas leaned back, staring at the ceiling. All his life he had believed that what he did that day belonged to the past, that it was finished, closed. Now he understood something different. Some acts don't end. They wait, and when the time is right, they knock. Outside, the sky darkened into evening. Inside the farmhouse, two lives, once separated by war and time, sat quietly together, preparing for a reunion neither of them had ever imagined. And somewhere nearby, a boy waited to meet the man who had changed his family's story before it even began. Thomas slept poorly that night. He lay in his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling as the house settled around him. Every creak sounded louder than usual. Every shadow felt heavier. His mind kept drifting back, not to the war itself but to the faces. Anna's face as a child, Anna's face as a woman, and now, a boy he had never met, waiting somewhere nearby because of a choice Thomas had made before that boy was even born. Just before dawn, Thomas got up. He brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table, watching the sky slowly lighten through the window. By the time he heard a car approaching the house again, he was already standing. This time, he didn't hesitate. The knock came, firm but respectful. Thomas opened the door. Anna stood there again, but she was not alone. A boy stepped forward from behind her. He was tall for his age, with dark hair and watchful eyes. He stood straight, shoulders tense, as if unsure whether to step closer or hold back. "This is my son," Anna said. "His name is Daniel." Daniel looked up at Thomas, studying him carefully. There was curiosity in his eyes, but also something else. Doubt, maybe, or hope, trying not to show itself too clearly. Thomas extended his hand slowly. "Hello, Daniel." Daniel hesitated for a second, then shook it. "Hi," the boy said. His voice cracked slightly, and he cleared his throat. "Thank you for letting us come." Thomas nodded. "I'm glad you did." They sat on the porch, the morning sun warming the wooden boards beneath their feet. Anna stayed quiet, letting the space belong to the two of them. Daniel broke the silence first. "My mom says you saved her during the war," he said. "I helped," Thomas replied. "That's all." Daniel frowned. "She says you didn't have to." Thomas considered that. "No," he admitted. "I didn't." The boy nodded slowly as if that answer mattered. "My history teacher says wars are about nations and borders," Daniel said. "But my mom says wars are really about people." Thomas smiled faintly. "Your mother is right." Daniel kicked at the porch with the toe of his shoe. "I get angry sometimes," he said suddenly. "At things I don't understand. At how unfair stuff is." Anna glanced at her son but didn't interrupt. Thomas leaned back against the wall. "Anger makes sense," he said, "especially when you care." Daniel looked up at him. "Then why do people say it's bad?" Thomas thought for a long moment. "Anger is like fire," he said finally. "It can keep you warm, or it can burn your house down. The difference is what you do with it." Daniel absorbed that quietly. "Did you feel angry during the war?" the boy asked. "Yes," Thomas said. "Every day." "What did you do with it?" Thomas's gaze drifted to the fields. "Sometimes," he said, "I used it to keep going. Other times, I let it turn into something else." Daniel waited. "I don't want you to think the war made me wise," Thomas added. "Mostly it just showed me how much damage people can do when they stop seeing each other as human." Daniel nodded slowly. "Is that why you helped my mom?" Thomas turned to him. "No," he said gently. "I helped her because she was a child, and children shouldn't pay for the mistakes of adults." Daniel's throat tightened. They spent the rest of the morning walking the land together. Thomas showed Daniel how to fix a loose fence, how to tell which trees were healthy, how to spot deer tracks near the creek. Daniel listened closely, asked questions, tried things with his hands instead of his phone. At one point, Daniel stopped near the old oak at the edge of the field. "My mom said you thought about her for years," he said quietly. Thomas nodded. I did. Why? Thomas considered the question carefully. Because when you save someone, he said, a part of you keeps walking with them even after you let go. Daniel swallowed. They returned to the house just before lunch. Anna watched them from the porch, her eyes wet, but her smile steady. Later, as they sat eating together, Daniel cleared his throat. I want to be like you, he said suddenly. Thomas nearly choked on his food. You don't want that, he said quickly. I'm just an old man who lives alone. Daniel shook his head. I want to be the kind of person who stops. Thomas stared at him. When everyone else keeps going, Daniel continued, I want to be the one who stops. The words hit Thomas harder than any memory of war. After lunch, Anna stood and reached for her coat. We should go, she said softly. Thomas felt an unexpected weight settle in his chest. Daniel hesitated at the door. Will we see you again? Thomas looked at Anna, then back at the boy. I'd like that, he said. Daniel smiled, fully this time. As the car drove away, Thomas stood on the porch long after it disappeared down the road. For 40 years, he had believed the most important chapter of his life was behind him. Now he understood something new. Some stories don't end when the war is over. They begin there. And for the first time in decades, Thomas felt something he hadn't dared to feel in a very long time. A future. The weeks that followed felt different to Thomas. Not louder, not faster, just fuller. He still woke before sunrise, still made his coffee the same way, still walked the fields each morning, checking fences and watching the land breathe. But now his thoughts no longer circled only the past. They moved forward too, like a door left open. Anna called the next Sunday. I hope it's not too soon, she said carefully. It's not, Thomas replied, surprising himself with how sure he felt. Daniel came with her the following weekend. This time, the boy arrived without hesitation. He ran up the porch steps like he already belonged there. Can I show you something? Daniel asked before even saying hello. Thomas smiled. Of course. Daniel pulled a folded piece of paper from his backpack. It was a school assignment, an essay titled, One Person Who Changed History. I wrote about you, Daniel said, suddenly shy. Is that okay? Thomas took the paper with steady hands and read slowly. The words were simple, but they carried weight. He didn't save an army. He saved one child. But that child became my mother, and my mother became my world. Thomas folded the paper carefully and handed it back. Thank you, he said. It was all he could manage. They spent the afternoon repairing an old shed. Daniel handed him tools, learning their names, learning patience. When a board slipped and nearly fell, Daniel reacted quickly, steadying it with both hands. You stopped, Thomas said quietly. Daniel grinned. Like you taught me. That evening, Anna stayed for dinner. The three of them sat together at the table, laughter filling the spaces where silence used to live. Afterward, Anna lingered while Daniel stepped outside to call a friend. There's something I need to ask you, she said. Thomas looked up. Go ahead. My mother died last year, Anna said softly. Before she passed, she told me something. Thomas listened. She said the man who saved me gave her peace, Anna continued. She said she always hoped you found some too. Thomas looked down at his hands. I don't know if I did, he said honestly. Anna reached across the table and touched his hand. I think you're starting to. Winter came early that year. The first snow fell quietly, covering the land in white. Daniel came again, bundled in a thick coat, his excitement clear as he stepped into the cold. I've never seen snow like this, he said. Thomas laughed. Then we'll fix that. They built something together that afternoon, not just a snowman, but a memory. Daniel's laughter echoed across the fields, a sound Thomas hadn't realized he had missed. That night, as Anna and Daniel prepared to leave, Daniel hesitated at the door. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes. Do you ever wish you had lived differently?" Thomas thought of the war, the years of silence, the long stretch of days he had filled with work to avoid feeling. "Yes," he said finally. "And no." Daniel frowned. "How can it be both?" "Because regret teaches you what matters," Thomas said. "But meeting you reminds me that it's never too late to live better." Daniel nodded slowly. When spring arrived, the land changed again. Thomas began teaching Daniel more: how to plant, how to fix things properly, how to take responsibility for mistakes without letting them define you. One afternoon, while they rested under the oak tree, Daniel asked, "Do you think one person can really change anything?" Thomas looked at the boy and smiled. "I know it," he said. That summer, Anna brought old photographs, some from the camp, some from her childhood, some from her life now. "This is my daughter," she said, pointing to a picture of a smiling girl. "She's 8. Thomas felt his chest tighten. "Does she know about me?" he asked. "She will," Anna said, "when she's ready." Time passed gently after that. Not all days were easy. Thomas still woke from bad dreams sometimes, still felt the weight of years pressing down on him. But now, when he sat on the porch at dusk, he didn't feel alone. One evening, Daniel stayed behind after Anna left. "I want to come here more," the boy said. "When school's out." Thomas hesitated only a moment. "You'd be welcome." Daniel smiled. As the stars appeared overhead, Thomas realized something that startled him. He had stopped counting the days. For most of his life, time had been something to endure. Now, it was something to share. And in that quiet realization, Thomas understood the truth he had never learned in war. Saving a life doesn't end when the danger is over. Sometimes it keeps going slowly, gently, until it saves yours too. The summer Daniel came to stay changed the rhythm of the farmhouse. Thomas had prepared for it in small, careful ways. He fixed the loose step on the porch, cleaned the spare bedroom that had not been used in years, bought extra food, standing longer than usual in the store, unsure of what a growing boy might like. When Anna's car arrived that first morning, Daniel jumped out before the engine even stopped. "I'm ready," he said, grinning. Anna smiled at Thomas. "Just for 2 weeks," she said gently, "unless you change your mind." Thomas nodded. "We'll see how it goes." Those 2 weeks filled the house with sound. Footsteps in the hallway, questions over breakfast, laughter that surprised Thomas every time it appeared. Daniel woke early, eager to help, following Thomas from chore to chore with a seriousness that made him smile. They repaired an old gate together, repainted the barn door, and planted a small garden behind the house. Thomas showed Daniel how to measure twice and cut once, how patience saved more time than speed ever did. One afternoon, as they worked side by side, Daniel asked, "Did you ever think about leaving here?" Thomas wiped sweat from his brow. "I thought about leaving everything," he admitted. "But not this place." "Why?" "Because it was quiet," Thomas said. "And after the war, quiet felt like safety." Daniel nodded. "Sometimes I wish things were quieter too." That night after dinner, Daniel sat on the porch steps, staring at the sky. "Can I ask you something kind of hard?" he said. Thomas sat beside him. "You can ask anything." "Do you ever feel like you wasted time?" Daniel asked. The question struck deep. Thomas considered his answer carefully. "I think I spent a lot of time surviving," he said, "and not enough time living." Daniel thought about that. "Is that bad?" "It depends," Thomas replied. "Surviving keeps you alive. Living gives it meaning." Daniel leaned back on his hands. "I think you're doing both now." Thomas smiled softly. Halfway through the second week, a storm rolled in. The wind rose suddenly, bending trees and shaking the house. Rain hammered the roof, loud and relentless. Daniel froze when the thunder cracked overhead. "It's okay," Thomas said, steady but calm. "Come here." Daniel sat close as the storm raged outside. "It sounds angry," Daniel said quietly. Thomas nodded. "Storms are like that." Daniel swallowed. The war must have sounded worse. "Yes," Thomas said. "But the worst part wasn't the noise." "What was it?" "The fear that no one would come if you needed help." Daniel looked at him. "But you came." Thomas met his gaze. "Because someone has to." The storm passed as quickly as it came. When the sky cleared, Daniel looked at Thomas with new understanding. A few days later, Anna returned. She watched her son move through the house with ease, his comfort obvious. "You've changed him," she said quietly to Thomas as they stood in the kitchen. Thomas shook his head. "He changed me too." That evening, Anna shared something she had kept to herself. "My mother told me once," she said, "that saving a life is like throwing a stone into water. You never see all the ripples." Thomas listened. "I think this place is one of those ripples," Anna added. When the 2 weeks ended, Daniel packed slowly. "I don't want to go," he admitted. Thomas felt a familiar ache, but this time it was different. "You'll come back," he said. Daniel hesitated. "Would you ever want to come see us?" Thomas hadn't considered that. "Yes," he said after a moment. "I think I would." The goodbye was quiet, no grand promises, just understanding. As the car disappeared down the road, Thomas stood on the porch again. But this time the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like space waiting to be filled. That night, Thomas sat at the kitchen table and opened the wooden box again. He looked at the old metal tag, the letters worn but still clear. For 40 years, it had reminded him of what he lost. Now it reminded him of what he had gained. Somewhere between the war and the quiet years, Thomas had forgotten that life could grow again. Daniel had reminded him. And with that reminder came a realization that settled deep in his bones. The war had taken many things from him, but it had not taken his chance to matter. Autumn arrived gently, like it understood the land. The leaves along the gravel road turned gold and red, drifting down one by one, softening the edges of everything. Thomas spent more time on the porch now, wrapped in a light jacket, watching the world slow down. Anna called more often. Sometimes Daniel took the phone. "Guess what I fixed today," he would say. "Guess what I planted. Guess what I stopped myself from doing." Thomas listened to every word. And then, one afternoon, the call came with different news. "Daniel's school is hosting a history night," Anna said. "Families share stories. He wants you there." Thomas hesitated. "I don't belong in front of crowds," he said. "You wouldn't be there for them," Anna replied gently. "You'd be there for him." That was enough. The school gym was small and bright, filled with folding chairs and quiet chatter. Children stood beside posters and photographs, nervous but proud. Daniel spotted Thomas immediately. He walked straight to him. "You came," Daniel said, relief clear in his voice. "I said I would," Thomas replied. Daniel's display was simple, a single photograph Anna had brought years ago, of a frightened child in a camp holding a metal tag. Next to it, a handwritten title, "One Choice." Daniel stood up straight. "This is my mom," he said to the small crowd that gathered. "She survived the war because one man stopped when he didn't have to." He looked at Thomas. "This is that man." There was no applause, just silence. The kind of silence that listens. Thomas felt his throat tighten, but he stayed where he was. Afterward, as people drifted away, a boy Daniel's age approached Thomas. "My grandfather fought too," the boy said quietly. "He never talks about it." Thomas nodded. Sometimes the hardest stories are the ones that matter most. The boy nodded back, thoughtful. That night, Thomas returned to the farmhouse feeling something he hadn't felt in decades. Pride. Not loud, not boastful. Quiet. Steady. Winter came again, and this time Thomas didn't face it alone. Anna and the children visited for Christmas. The house filled with warmth, laughter, and the smell of food. The old oak tree stood bare outside, but inside, life moved freely. As they sat together after dinner, Daniel's younger sister climbed onto Thomas's lap without hesitation. "Tell me a story," she said. Thomas froze for a moment. He had never told stories. But then he began, not about war, but about the land, about trees that survived storms, about fences that needed mending, about stopping to help when something was broken. She listened, wide-eyed. When spring returned once more, Thomas noticed something else. He slept better. The dreams still came sometimes, but they no longer owned him. One morning, as he walked the field, he realized he was no longer counting the years behind him. He was counting what lay ahead. On his 73rd birthday, Anna arrived with a small package. Inside was a framed photograph. It showed Thomas and Daniel standing under the oak tree, both smiling, caught in an unguarded moment. On the back, Daniel had written, "You stopped once, and because of that, you never really stopped at all." Thomas stared at the words for a long time. That evening, as the sun set and the land grew quiet, Thomas sat on the porch, just as he always had. But now, when he looked down the gravel road, he didn't see emptiness. He saw arrival. 40 years ago, he had saved a child during the worst moment of his life. He had believed that act belonged to the past. But now he understood the truth. Some choices don't fade. They wait. They grow. They come back to your door when you least expect them, and they ask you to live again. And this time Thomas Hale answered,